pleasure to be here in Barcelona once again. And yes, like Will Alsop, I also like to engage people. So I think this is probably my 8th or 9th lecture in Barcelona, mainly before at the IAC, and now for the first time here at this wonderful institution. Okay, so the soft stuff is the hard stuff. Now, before you start thinking about alcohol, you may not know what the title of my lecture really means at this point, but believe me, it will become clear very shortly. So, cultural strategies for urban design in an age of change. Really responding to the theme of objects, the city, and landscape and territory, I was thinking that absolutely the city is an object, but it is also a million and one infinitesimal number of objects. It's also an ecosystem, and it's a process, and it's a series of infinitesimal number of processes. So it's on the processes and the programs that I'm going to focus this evening. This very first image is very meaningful to me. It's an exhibition that I organized, I curated for the Roca London Gallery, which, as you may know, is the London Gallery for the luxury bathroom brand, Spanish brand Roca, who were a great client of mine last year. And Will Alsop came to the opening party. So, I do a lot of different things. As a curator of exhibitions and conferences, as a founder of my own webzine, urbanista.org, which is dedicated to livable urbanism, which I set up after the economic crisis of 2009, when it became more and more difficult to actually write for national newspapers and magazines because the space for editorial was getting smaller and smaller and more restricted. So I decided to create my own webzine. I also write books, and I'm also a consultant advisor working with both the public and private sectors. And I deal, I think, if you could sum it up in one sentence, with the relationships between design and society. And the complex terms of architecture and urban design's engagement with the world. The strengths and the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats inherent in urban and peri-urban rural situations, and all the creative mediations that are needed along the way. So Urbanistas, women innovators in architecture, urban and landscape design, included the work of 6 very experienced women across all of those disciplines, including Joanna Gibbons, who I reckon is one of the finest British landscape architects, who does an awful lot of fantastic urban plans as well for people like the Greater London Authority. When many of the best urban solutions were designed long ago, and here's Van Eyck's 1947 playground design, which was implemented hundreds of times in Amsterdam on typologically different sites, but in each case in a fashion that revealed their differences. How can we make sure, when we have this great legacy of things that worked then and still work today, that we continue to see the city and its challenges through the eyes of all its dwellers, yet at the same time retain our critical professional focus and let one fully inform and impact on the other to the best ends. Also, because so often the writing is on the wall, queremos una solución urgente, we need an urgent solution. And this is the condition that so many architects and designers are confronted with right now. So how can we therefore create and equip ourselves with the best tools, processes, programs and networks to truly respond to these types of urgencies and more, and all kinds of social needs? I think most of us know that this calls for a truly multidisciplinary set of practices. And we know that we need to balance the hard and the soft in cities through landscape infrastructure and urbanism, through green lungs, intelligently designed to counterbalance the tectonics and the density that we need as structures, and a sense of porosity and permeability, which is so desirable to keep territories open and flexible and capable of accommodating all sorts of activities, like the market outside. So by soft planning, I mean not only landscape, but I mean very familiar and new cultural programming and activities, ones that really plant seeds, that strengthen the resources and allow for the versatile amenity of urban places. And the Super Keelan urban space by big architects, I understand, won one of the Aga Khan Awards in the current round, quite rightly as well, in my view. In fact, such processes and programs are indivisible from contemporary urban identity. So the soft stuff is the hard stuff. This was the shared mantra of all the women in our exhibition, which I adopted because I like the idea. And I think such a perception is very necessary to correct the past traditions, which actually are still with us if you look at the world across all cultures. The master planning of the rational city of the past, which instituted a narrow area ratio-based approach to urban territories. It abstracted the green field, it denied the street as a plural and a highly differentiated domain. More's the pity. But if you can read my caption, I tell the story. The one image on the right-hand side is somehow an homage to Corbusier's Plan Voisin, created by a Hong Kong property developer for a new town. And such typologies are very common still in China and many other places. So Jane Jacobs, along with Jan Gehl, William White, Robert Venturi, Denise Scott Brown in the US, along with many others, were some of the pioneers who, as you know, from the late 50s, early 60s, questioned the divisive approaches of modernism. And they took to the streets, literally, Jan Gehl and his psychologist wife, Ingrid, back in 1962 or 3, I think it was, when they got research grants. They went to Italian cities and gathered their notebooks, their drawings, their sketches, their photographs. And they were applying a forensic, highly perceptive set of strategies, reviewing what they found and applying their findings to their own practice. This was a modus operandi, a way of looking at the world which really influenced Gehl's course from that point onwards. So practices that also challenge perceived boundaries between specialists and experts and everyone else in cities. Why should they be in two separate camps? And also by foregrounding participatory placemaking, which is the theme of the new book that we published this year with my co-author, Thomas Ermacora, who does participatory placemaking full-time as his business and consultancy. So the more intense and prolonged discussions with local communities. I'm not saying this is easy. This, in some ways, it does make it hard, and as Will also said, I like to engage with people, and often I get myself into trouble, and I guess that's partly what he's referring to. So what happens when you take the whole process of discussing the merits of a sustainable plan, in this case in Calama in Chile, intended to create solutions for the old mining town up until 2025. What happens when it becomes a discussion on the street or in a new, specially purpose-built structure where you can go free of charge absolutely every single day almost? There's some kind of discussion going on, and you can take part, and you can vote. You can vote as part of the process on the principles underlying the long-term plan. Actually, that's an image from Elemental's other plan for Constituzione, which also the first one that Elemental, the Chilean practice, implemented, which included a voting process. And from the success of that, they also rode up on the waves of that and created Caluma Plus on a similar basis. So all this great big mountain of questions and issues, it led me to spend at least 3 years researching globally to write my 2012 book, Master Planning Futures, about the necessary process of questioning the old-style top-down master planning and coming up with more adaptive and flexible, sustainable, and socially inclusive ideas instead. And ironically, it was across the whole period of the severe economic crash, when actually most master plans in the UK, at least, and elsewhere, went on hold because the equity was just not there anymore. And the municipalities were also like rabbits with the headlights. And in that period of when suddenly people were talking about casino capitalism, although I'm sure they were before, in that period of reflection, I continued to ask, why cannot everyone have a genuine say in how cities are made? Are we all to be hapless victims of casino capitalism? And meanwhile, the cartoon, Honey, I've Lost the House, oh, don't worry, it's not worth anything anyway. All these things was just so incredibly poignant and tragic for everybody involved. So for some architects, these kind of ideas run deep, and they've from the very beginning made their foundation on such bases, such as Teddy Cruz, who is based in San Diego, working in informal, liminal contexts, such as Isidro in Tijuana on the Mexican border, housing and public space projects to help build social capital and bottom-up agency. So creating micro-policies, if you can see a little bit of this detail, for example, new zoning categories that allow new affordable housing where they didn't exist before, facilitating plug-in permit processes, so allowing the NGO, the local NGO, to manage them, and plugging in support systems. So, for example, there's suddenly senior citizen housing, childcare facilities, community living rooms, and so on. And also mediating the economic process, so allowing residents to partner with the local NGO to co-own their resources, to co-design the economic process as well as the management process. So in considering all these different mindsets underlying this theme, I guess you could say that many of the projects that really interest me with regard to the city as a social landscape, they resonate with this saying here. And there was, she's not around anymore, but there was an excellent writer on urban planning called Alison Revetz from in the 1970s and 80s. She was at her most prolific. And in her book, Remaking Cities, Contradictions of the Recent Urban Environment, which is 1980, she wrote, "Our present system for moulding the environment and its greatest indictment, meaning accusation, may be the degree to which it flouts, corrupts, and wastes people, and is predicated on a human nature that says, 'I'm entitled.'" And I think, for me, reading that, it's not a narrow moralistic position that she takes. She goes on to observe that, well, a qualitative change in quality will be accomplished when it operates for people who say instead, "I feel," or "I am," I'm here, and I exist, and I feel. I'm a feeling human being. And then they may in turn create environments possibly of a richness and a variety that are as yet unimagined. And I think that's a really important distinction, and particularly that she's not laying down the laws so moralistically, but she's really exploring the value systems behind many urban design planning policies and approaches. So why did we need to write our book, Recoded City? And I also explain to you in a short while why we called it Recoded City. Well, it's really because the wealth of the city needs to be drawn out. Growing urbanization and deteriorating ecosystems affecting cities and their regions, they make them the nexus of mankind's challenges and opportunities. And as I already said, top-down master planning and conventional policy making are not delivering the systemic changes needed to secure better living conditions for the 90%. And social equity and environmental conservation are not sufficiently high priorities, although undoubtedly they are a lot more, people are a lot more aware of them than they ever were. So participatory placemaking requires that we don't lie back on our motorbikes and just take it easy and let other people take care of things. That we do become more of active citizens, absolutely. And participatory placemaking, so combining top-down and bottom-up strategies in many cases, not only bottom-up strategies, we see a burgeoning movement which is really engaging citizens of all nationalities across the world in advancing visions for their cities and towns. So supporting their well-being through localized design and a higher degree of self-governance, regenerating neighborhoods that have in many ways been hugely affected by financial and social segregation, where the whole raison d'etre of industry is completely, has been fallen away. And instead you have pieces of land that need remediation. You have industrial warehouses that could be renovated and recycled and put to new uses in a most amazing way. So these, with individuals and groups at the heart of urban renewal, resilience can be built, sustainability from the ground up through a variety of innovative approaches. And then these maximize social and environmental capital and create more equitable and satisfying places. So about the title, well, the field is full of books with flashy titles like, well, The Endless City, The Just City. Earlier on, there was The Rational City. Ours has a double helix on the cover, if you look carefully. And it evokes both the digital and the biological all in one. Since, first of all, Thomas calls his own participatory activities recoding. He likes to use that verb. For me personally, and I've gone on since to create a new publication since this one, it makes real sense to discuss the engaged role of digital platforms and tools that are now being designed and evolved very much with community groups at the helm or involved, or to be the beneficiaries in many innovative ways now for what I call hyperlocal design. So this issue, Hyperlocal, will be out in January with a whole range of different authors, 15 in fact, from across cultures. So we are not totally alone in our research focus, although we did feel there were very few books on the subject. Handmade urbanism, from community initiatives to participatory models, is a marvelous classic from 2013 by Ute Weiland, who is the German former director of the Alfred Herrhausen Society in Berlin, and Markus Rosa. And Markus is the subject of one of our 43 stories, short stories, but compelling, we hope, compelling narratives about exemplary participatory processes and initiatives. He's he's a Brazilian architect who's been working for the last 6 years in Sao Paulo and Rio, where he's carried out extensive mapping to better understand the identities and the correspondences between things, including existing and potential networks of communication. This is one of his graphics, which somehow crystallizes the interconnections between all the different spheres of society. You could call them objects, but I think it's nice also to call them an ecosystem, really. And he quotes the psychologist and human rights activist Nomfunda Valesa, who says that solutions to problems germinate in the communities rather than in the boardrooms. And I think that's a sentiment that we can all in some way identify with. So this graphic bears out his belief that, in fact, activating stakeholders at different levels allows for the gradual formation of more complex participatory models through partnerships that build through trust, which is absolutely critical, through time, to negotiate a common base and to open doors for development. So for his project, Edificio Unayo in Sao Paulo, which was creating affordable housing close to the city centre, he and his collaborator, Christine Stephanie, set in process a design project with quite far-reaching consequences. And we, with our book, with our infographics, we had a goal that we wanted to open up all the processes that were pursued, and without making it too complex to understand, to show the chain of the small but critical decisions made along the way, which orientate the value systems inherent in the project. So, if you can perhaps see the scale of this trajectory from the top right down to the bottom left, I'll tell you what it says. So they first completed, or they chose, an uncompleted high-rise. Nothing really exceptional, but they decided to retrofit it. And secondly, so cleaning the abandoned concrete frame, installed it with the necessary amenities. And this work included creating a semi-public area in the setback from the plot edge. And at this point, media interest was triggered, and we, as you see, as we move through the infographic, and 30 engineering trainees that they'd never met before offered to help them out on the project. And then students from the Faculty of Architecture got involved, along with members of the community, because of the social media awareness. And 42 families were housed in the scheme, a mix of low-income and disabled and elderly residents. And so the consequences of the social capital built were many. By mixing the urban populations, it helped to combat Sao Paulo's high inequality and segregation. So we, at every stage along the way, we're thinking, why did they do that as opposed to that? Because the result was in many ways win-win as opposed to win-lose for people. So by using existing housing building stock and reducing public spending, it maximizes value for landlords. And it also makes best use of a central location closer to residents' jobs and cuts their commuting times. And it also provides an alternative to slum dwelling with a better quality of life, with more dignity and less violence. So one last example, which we had great fun exploring. There is a really quite unique body in New York that creates visual tools to offer a means to open doors to further active knowledge and urban intelligence in the community, and that's the non-profit Center for Urban Pedagogy, known as CUP. It was founded in 2001, and it uses art, design, and visual culture, working actively all the time on a multiplicity of projects, working with artists, architects, designers, graphic designers, filmmakers, to increase meaningful civic engagement, particularly amongst historically underrepresented communities. So their visual explanations of complex policy issues, posters, leaflets, toolkits, our flyers are created both with and for community organizers and city dwellers, and even with homeless people, of course, as well. And the range of social justice issues is endless, from fracking to federalism, homelessness, street vending, and so on. So here, vendor power helps street vendors know their rights and avoid fines by making the rules easier to understand. City residents can learn how to, in a workshop, how to advocate for local park improvements at the launch of How Can I Improve My Park? I got arrested, now what? This project was completed by CUP with the graphic novelist Danica Novgorodov and the Center of Court Innovation. So it's a comic book guide to the New York City juvenile justice system for youth who've been arrested. And it's currently handed out by the Department of Probation to every youth in the system, with over 50,000 copies ordered to date. And to go back to this one, which was a fantastic project and has a curatorial method that is very inspirational. Urban Investigations, multifaceted, involved high school students carrying out video interviews with key specialists. So you see here the group of students interviewing Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez about a bill to support bodegas, corner grocers, in the neighborhood of the Bronx, to get grants to increase their range of fresh produce sold, to promote themselves and to boost their own research on these cornerstones of community life. So they started a process where they asked urban planners about regulatory hurdles, architects about prefabricated urban unit design and production, developers about funding, and community advocates about their concerns. So they not only created films and posters, but they get specific training in interviewing, investigative, journalistically in style, and they're encouraged to use lateral thinking. So after the interviews, they switch roles in the group to explore ideas through making things as well, like short animations and even puppets representing different policies, to reenact some of those interviews and reflect further and to hypothesize about different outcomes. And the idea is that in the process of their work, they see that the physical, social, and the economic and the environmental elements of the places where they live are not given. You cannot take them for granted. They're not given, and they're also not, let's say, an issue that you can no longer discuss. They are still up for some way, to some extent, a great extent, still open for discussion and negotiation as part of democracy. So the parents of New York school children are here reviewing Schools Are Us posters, so it very much brings together parents and school children. And then finally, what is Affordable Housing Toolkit includes infographics that allows communities to see in a matrix and a chart their neighborhood incomes and how they relate to rent costs, and also as well what affordability programs are available and who qualifies for them. And so the toolkit can be used by groups in advance to advance in-depth discussions about the specific workings of housing policy and issues of eligibility in relation to income levels, and what members of the group wish to see happening and developing in their neighborhood in the future. So what this has at the heart of it is understanding the system, understanding the systems that exist. And it's a fast door opener for workshop participants who can also have access to an interactive map that they can use after the workshop. So when I interviewed Christine Gaspar, the executive director of CUP, she said that she feels that what makes her organization work so well in New York is the city has such a robust community organizing culture. And this, on one level, it's born from a history of social justice groups. But at the same time, it's because there is also an equally vibrant art and design culture to collaborate with. And I also think that CUP are active, very proactive in reaching out and finding through asking for proposals from architects and designers, working with really good people who are committed to this field. So although the collective brainstorming that is participatory design can have highly beneficial results, this does depend on the social, political, and economic processes and dynamics in the context of the context in question. And then these are forces that have to be mediated and marshaled in a custom-designed way. You cannot just do old cut and paste, like using a software program without implying your brain and your human intelligence. So using local materials and skills and drawing out local knowledge and resources and enthusiasm to institute change, it creates a legacy that local people can actually do something with. And that's to do something with once, inevitably, architects and workshop leaders leave because their time on the project has come to an end. And it genuinely helps to further participants' self-determination. And I feel that this is far more than only legacy, and legacy is a big word anyway. This is also livable urbanism. And this is the objective. So from objects to objectives, I think we need them both, and we need processes that are intelligent. So soft in methods and processes, but hard in their determination to counter urban challenges with imagination and ingenuity. Thanks very much for listening.